A tree is cut somewhere in Cameroon. Somebody should know the exact plot it came from. Somebody should know the species. Somebody measures it. Somebody assigns it a value on a piece of paper. A truck moves it. A sawmill processes it, or doesn't. Customs records it. A ship carries it across an ocean. And somewhere else in the world, another country records that timber arriving. In theory, these two records should tell roughly the same economic story, what Cameroon says left and what another country says arrived. But they don't. According to a major investigation released in May of 2026, researchers estimated an average annual trade mispricing related financial discrepancy connected to Cameroon's timber exports of approximately 289 million US dollars between 2013 and 2023. $289 million every year on average for more than a decade. Now, I could look directly into this camera and say, somebody stole $289 million. That sentence would travel. It would get clipped. It would get shared. It would probably make people angry. But I'm not going to say it because I cannot prove that statement. An aggregate trade data cannot prove it either. So if this series is going to mean anything, the standard has to be higher than a headline. If the truth is explosive, we do not need to exaggerate it. We just need the courage to follow it. I'm Joshua T. Berglan, the world's mayor, reporting from Cameroon. This is the World's Mayor Experience, and today we're opening the first file. Welcome to the Shadow Files. This series is going to investigate the systems connecting Cameroon and Africa to the rest of the world. Resources, money, trade, corporate ownership, technology, government, migration, human beings, power. And we're going to follow those systems wherever the evidence takes us. Not where I want the evidence to take us, not where social media wants it to take us, not where a political party wants it to take us, not where a corporation wants it to take us, where the evidence takes us. And there are 4 questions you're going to hear in every shadow file. What do we know? What does the evidence suggest? What do we still not know? And who have we asked for answers? Those 4 questions are the spine of this series because I am not interested in conspiracy television. I'm not interested in outrage for clicks, and I'm definitely not interested in choosing the villain before we know what happened. I want documents. I want data. I want witnesses. I want experts. I want people who agree with me and disagree with me. If government has an explanation, I want to hear it. If a company has an explanation, I want to hear it. If researchers got something wrong, I want to know. If I'm wrong, please correct me. Because the goal is not to prove the conclusion I walked in wanting. The goal is to discover what is true. Journalism without curiosity becomes propaganda. Accusations without proof can destroy innocent people. But evidence can change systems. But journalism is not supposed to give you the most exciting answer. It's supposed to give you the answer that survives scrutiny. Here's what we know. The records don't fully match. Here's what the evidence suggests. Trade mispricing may explain part of the difference. Here's what we still don't know. Which individual transactions explain it? What portion has legitimate explanations? And what portion, if any, represents intentional misconduct? If the truth is explosive, we don't need to exaggerate it. Now look at the scale. Between 2013 and 2023, the report calculated cumulative trade discrepancies of approximately $1.2 billion with China, $760 million with Vietnam, $504 million with European Union countries, and $125 million with the United Kingdom. Again, those numbers are discrepancies. They are not convictions, but Look at 2023 alone. Cameroon reportedly recorded approximately $479 million in wood product exports. Its trading partners recorded approximately $845 million in corresponding imports. After adjusting for the normal difference in valuation, the calculated unexplained gap was approximately $327 million. The year before, approximately $418 million. Imagine those were the books of your business. Your accounting record says one number, your customer records say another, and hundreds of millions of dollars sit between them. Would you shrug? Would you open the files? That's why we're here. Not because we've already proven a crime, because the discrepancy is large enough that an explanation is required. So what exactly is trade mispricing? Forget the complicated language. It can involve manipulating the declared value, volume, quantity, or quality of goods in international trade. And this is where the financial crime can become incredibly sophisticated. Moving value across borders does not always require somebody sneaking through an airport with a suitcase full of cash. Sometimes paper moves the value. An invoice can move the value. A classification can move the value. A declaration can move the value. A shipment moves one direction, money moves another. And suddenly, the paperwork becomes part of the mechanism. But again, that doesn't mean every discrepancy is fraud. That's why we need the underlying transactions. Invoices, customs declarations, bills of lading, shipping records, species, volumes, exporters, importers, dates, prices, contracts. Because a national statistic can tell us something deserves investigation. It cannot tell us this specific person committed this specific crime. That distinction protects innocent people. And if wrongdoing is eventually proven, it makes the case stronger. Now let's follow another trail, the company. Suppose you identify the company attached to a forestry concession. Have you identified who ultimately profits? Not necessarily. That's where we get into beneficial ownership. Forget the technical language. It asks a simple question. Who is the actual human being at the end of the corporate chain? Who ultimately owns, controls, or benefits from the company? Because one company can own another company, which owns another company, which may be registered somewhere else, layer after layer, jurisdiction after jurisdiction, until the name printed on a forestry permit may tell you very little about the people ultimately receiving the economic benefit. The forest is local. The ownership can be global. Cameroon created a centralized beneficial ownership framework under reforms implemented in 2023. Companies are required to report qualifying benefit owners to the tax administration, but that registry is not publicly accessible. And I want to be fair here. International standards focus primarily on ensuring competent authorities have accurate and current ownership information. They do not simply require every detail to be publicly searchable by everyone. Transparency advocates want greater public access, especially when nationally import natural resources are involved. And that is a legitimate debate. Privacy matters. Security matters. Not every private detail belongs online. But when a private company receives permission to extract value from a nationally important natural resource, does the public have a greater interest in knowing who ultimately benefits? That's a question worth asking. And then there is the sanctions issue. According to the Financial Transparency Coalition, several forestry operators previously sanctioned for violations later received additional sales of standing volume logging concessions. 5 of those operators collectively held more than 20,000 hectares in those concessions. Now, don't run with that sentence and turn it into something I didn't say. A sanction does not automatically mean a company is permanently banned from operating. A sanction can range from a formal notice to a temporary suspension to something more serious. So the questions that matter are more precise. What exactly was each company sanctioned for? How serious was the violation? Was the problem corrected? Were the fines paid? Was the company formally cleared? What review took place before another title was issued? Now, if there is a legitimate process for restoring compliance, show us the process. If there isn't, then we have a different story. This is what I mean when I say a question is not an attack. Asking a ministry for records is not anti-government. Asking a company who owns it is not anti-business. Asking why a previously sanctioned operator later received another title is not a conviction. Strong institutions should survive strong questions. Good companies should benefit from transparency. Accountability is not hatred. Truth is not treason. There's another number worth looking at. In 2021, Cameroon's National Agency for Financial Investigation estimated losses connected to illegal logging and wildfire exploitation at roughly 33 billion CFA francs, about 59 million US dollars annually. The Financial Transparency Coalition's timber trade mispricing estimate is roughly 5 times that amount. Yeesh. But again, those two numbers were not produced using identical methods. And the earlier estimate also included wildlife exploitation. So I'm not telling you one number proves the other wrong. I'm telling you something simpler. Independent analysis is pointing to potential economic leakage on a scale large enough that somebody should explain it. And that's where I want government involved. Not automatically as the villain, as the source. The Financial Transparency Coalition says its researchers repeatedly sought updated sanctions information and concession records from Cameroon's Ministry of Forest and Wildfire and did not receive the information they requested. That was their experience. It is not mine. So I'm going to ask for myself. What does MINFOF believe explains these international timber trade discrepancies? How often are Cameroon's export records reconciled against destination country records? When a major discrepancy appears, who investigates? What exactly were the sanctions against the operators identified in the report? What did those companies do to regain eligibility? What oversight occurred before additional titles were granted? What concession information can ordinary citizens access? And how much beneficial ownership information can communities obtain about companies extracting resources near them? If there are strong answers, I want them on this show. If the report got something wrong, I want that on this show too. The goal is not to embarrass Cameroon, not at all. I want Cameroon strong. I want legitimate businesses protected. I want institutions people trust. I want responsible investment. And I want difficult questions answered with evidence. Accountability and development are not enemies. And I need to address something else, because I already know how 30-second clips travel. Someone outside this continent is going to watch part of this investigation and say, "See, Africa's corrupt." No, that's intellectually lazy. An international timber transaction does not happen on only one side of the border. There may be a logging company, an exporter, Cameroonian customs, a freight company, a ship, a bank, an insurer, an importer, another customs authority, a processor, a corporate owner, a retailer. An international transaction is international. Sometimes corruption absolutely exists in African institutions. When it does, expose it. Sometimes African companies break laws. When they do, investigate them. But if a financial discrepancy appears inside international trade, the investigation cannot magically stop at the African border. If the transaction is global, the investigation has to be global too. You cannot build a global economy and then localize all the blame, because extraction has a destination. If illegally sourced timber leaves one country, somebody receives it. If illicit money leaves one financial system, some other system handles it. If an importer buys questionable material, there is an importer. If a bank processes a suspicious transaction, there is a bank. Source countries have responsibilities. Destination countries have responsibilities. Companies have responsibilities. Financial institutions have responsibilities. Accountability cannot stop at the African border. And this brings us to the bigger story. For generations, one of the easiest ways to tell stories about Africa has been to begin at the consequence: poverty, broken infrastructure, lack of opportunity, struggling communities. But investigative journalism should ask, what produced the consequence? If a country produces extraordinary natural wealth, but communities closest to that wealth remain economically fragile, don't stop the story at the struggling community. Follow the resource, follow the concession, follow the paperwork, follow the ownership, follow the export, follow the buyer, follow the tax, follow the money, then come back and tell me why that community is poor. Because sometimes what the world calls poverty is the final chapter of an economic story nobody bothered to investigate. We photographed the struggling farmer, but did we follow the cocoa? We photographed the miner, but did we follow the gold? We photographed the fishing village, but did we follow the industrial vessel? We photographed communities beside the forest, but did we follow the timber? If you only document the person who ended up with the least and never investigate everyone who captured value before them, you haven't explained poverty. You've documented the symptom. And this is where media matters. I've spent years teaching people to own their media, but owning media isn't powerful because everybody should become an influencer. A camera can preserve testimony. A phone can document conditions. A website can preserve records. A podcast can question an official. An independent platform can maintain an archive. A journalist with independent distribution doesn't have to wait for a giant media corporation to decide whether the story deserves to exist. Media infrastructure is evidence infrastructure. And when communities have the ability to document their own reality, the shadow has fewer places to hide. That is what I want the Shadow Files to become. Not a series obsessed with darkness, a series obsessed with what becomes possible when the lights are turned on. Because I'm not interested in exposing problems simply so everybody can become angry. Anger burns quickly. I want curiosity, courage, evidence, accountability, and possibility. I want legal forestry companies to succeed. I want Cameroon to collect what is legally owed. I want international buyers to know what they're purchasing. I want communities to understand what is happening around their land. I want consumers to understand where their products come from. And I want investors to know which operators deserve their trust. Transparency isn't revenge. Accountability isn't hatred. Journalism shouldn't exist only to destroy. At its best, Journalism makes invisible systems visible, so somebody has a chance to build something better. And let me say something directly to anyone who thinks asking difficult questions about Cameroon means attacking Cameroon. I can love Cameroon and ask Cameroon hard questions. I can respect government and still ask government for records. I can support African businesses and still investigate African businesses. I can believe deeply in Africa and still expose wrongdoing if the evidence proves wrongdoing. Love does not require silence. Patriotism does not require blindness. Leadership does not mean protecting people from uncomfortable facts. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for a country is believe it is strong enough to face the truth. So let's close this first file the way every shadow file should close. What do we know? The Financial Transparency Coalition analyzed Cameroonian timber trade records covering 2013 through 2023. It compared exports reported by Cameroon with imports reported by trading partners. It adjusted for the normal difference between export and import valuation. After that adjustment, researchers estimated an average trade mispricing related financial discrepancy of approximately $289 million per year. Cameroon's raw log export duty increased dramatically during that period, eventually reaching 75%, while processed wood faced a much lower rate. The report identifies underreporting to avoid duties as one plausible explanation for part of the discrepancy, but says transaction-level investigation is needed before concluding illegality. Previously sanctioned forestry operators later received additional concessions, and public access to beneficial ownership information remains limited. That's what we know. What does the evidence suggest? Large and persistent trade discrepancies, significant tax differences between raw and processed wood, documented risk of misdeclaration, and limited ownership transparency make this sector worthy of a serious transaction-level investigation, but suggest does not mean proves. What do we still not know? Which specific transactions explain the gap? How much can be explained by legitimate accounting? Timing, transit, classification, or logistical differences? How much involves inaccurate valuation? How much, if any, represents intentional fraud? Which exporters are involved? Which importers? Who ultimately owns them? What explanation does government provide? And where wrongdoing has occurred, who was held accountable? Those questions are not weaknesses in the story. They are the story. And who are we asking? Cameroon's Ministry of Forest and Wildlife, custom authorities, finance officials, forestry companies, exporters, international importers, trade economists, environmental investigators, communities living around forestry concessions, and the researchers behind the report itself? Especially the people who disagree. If you believe $289 million overstates the problem, show me why. If you believe the real problem is larger, show me why. If you're defending the system, bring the evidence. If you're accusing the system, bring the evidence. You don't win here because you're louder. Your argument wins if your facts survive scrutiny. Bring the receipts. And if you work inside forestry, government, customs, shipping, finance, importing, exporting, or another part of this supply chain, and you have firsthand knowledge or documentation relevant to this investigation, I would like to hear from you. Protect yourself. Do not recklessly send sensitive information in a way that could put you or someone else at risk. Make contact first, and if something I've reported is wrong, please tell me. A correction is not journalism failing. A correction is journalism working. If the evidence changes, we change the story. And if you think the first file leaves us with questions, the next file is even harder to explain. In 2023, Cameroon officially reported exporting approximately 22.3 kilograms of gold. The United Arab Emirates reported importing more than 15 tons of gold from Cameroon. In that same year, kilograms on one side, tons on the other. Almost 700 times more. But once again, we're not going to choose the explanation before we investigate it. Where was the gold mined? Who bought it? How did it move? Who recorded it? Who didn't? What can be explained? What cannot? And who benefited? Somebody has an explanation. I want to hear it. Next on the Shadow Files, the Cameroon Gold Gap. We're following the goal. I'm Joshua T. Berglan, the world's mayor. This is the World's Mayor Experience, and these are the Shadow Files. Cameroon is where I'm reporting from. Africa is our field. The world is the beat. Remember the standard. What do we know? What does the evidence suggest? What do we still not know? And who are we asking for answers? Follow the document. Follow the product. Follow the ownership. Follow the money. Never confuse a loud accusation with a proven fact. And never confuse caution with cowardice. Because asking a hard question responsibly can be far more dangerous to a broken system than screaming an accusation you cannot prove. I'm not interested in the shadow because I'm fascinated by darkness. I'm interested in the shadow because somewhere inside it, there's information people need to build something better. And if the truth is powerful enough, we will not need to make it louder. We will just need the courage to publish it. This investigation has only just begun.